Hello, and welcome to Blue Grit Radio. This is Eric, your host, and in this episode, I'm actually talking to Matt and Chris. They are a law enforcement family, father and son from New Jersey, and they're running Real Talk LEO, the podcast. So check them out as well. But in this episode, we're actually discussing a lot of the nationwide trends, what's been going on with law enforcement, but then we really get into brass tacks of how to curb and go in a better direction. And that goes from my recent experience with hiring, but it permeates a lot deeper to conversations of culture, morale, and how we pick ourselves up as a profession, how we pick up our team, how we move in a positive forward direction. If you haven't already, check them out, follow them, and subscribe. Real Talk LEO on Instagram and their podcast, as well as this, Blue Grit Radio and Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. Take care and happy holidays.
Welcome to another episode of Real Talk LEO. I'm Matt, and I'm joined with my co-host, Chris. Today, we're joined with a special guest all the way from Washington State, Sergeant Eric. Eric, I don't want to steal your thunder. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, my name's Eric Tung. I've been out in Washington State for my whole law enforcement career and mostly where I grew up out here on the west side of the state. Currently a sergeant with hiring and recruiting, and you can add on training sergeant because we did a good job with recruiting. So we can get into that later, though.
For sure. Just for your listeners, just to introduce myself, Matt from Real Talk. I've been a police officer for 13 years, currently a SWAT team leader, a peer support officer, do field training officers, and I'm a sergeant. And my co-host, who's also my father, is a retired law enforcement officer. I'll let you go into your background.
Yeah, I started my career in law enforcement in 1996. Patrolman, detective, sergeant. Finished my career as a lieutenant. I too was on SWAT. I was a SWAT team leader for 13 years of my 15 years on the team. I worked in IA for a short period of time. And I also finished my career in the training unit and recruiting and hiring and also resiliency.
So what we like to do is kind of capitalize on networking and communication. That's kind of our thing with Real Talk. Just a quick backstory as to how this relationship came to be with us and Eric. He started seeing some of our stuff on Instagram and reached out to us, and that's what we're looking for. We had a great conversation prior to this, and so much relatable information between our agencies. And we're over in New Jersey. Eric's all the way across the country in Washington, and it's like we're like neighboring departments sharing a lot of the same issues. And it's just, that's kind of how this all started. So we don't know too much about each other. From the conversations we've had, Eric, you were saying that you've had a lot of success in the recruitment side of your agency. Is that right?
Yeah. So I appreciate you drawing for the listeners like the connectivity and the connectedness, I guess, in our shared issues. A couple of things happen in a couple of places in the country, and then it rocks the whole country, right? And that's law enforcement, that's every department, every officer's family. I certainly lost some friends with the career that chose another path, and I'm guessing you gentlemen have seen that in your neck of the woods as well.
Absolutely. We're seeing it a lot.
Yeah. So, we were facing this unprecedented hiring crisis and staffing crisis over the last couple of years since the death of George Floyd, and with COVID and all these other stressors exacerbating it. Fortunately for me and my department, there was a dedicated effort to push in the effort of recruiting and hiring and putting dedicated resource out there. And I know it wasn't an easy decision to make. Every body counts and everybody is pulling double duty in some regard or another, whether it's extra hours on the street or extra caseload and all that. But luckily my department went ahead and greenlit me to take over as a full-time supervisor of a couple background officers and a full-time recruiter. And definitely a lot of lessons learned in the last 6 or 7 months. But we have been able to close a large gap of our vacancies, nearly all of them at this present time. So, and that's been, I don't know if we've ever been there in my 15 and a half years here.
I can speak for me. When I first got hired, we are a civil service jurisdiction. So in order for us to get hired, we have to take a statewide test. We get on a list And then when our number's called, we start the interview process. That's how it kind of begins for us. That's always been very competitive, to the point where when I was 18 years old and I was still going to college, that's when I took the test for the first time, knowing that the process was going to take about 2 years or so for me to get into it. And that's where my timeline ended up. I was close to 21 years old when I got in. My point being, it was super competitive, and we're not seeing that anymore. We're going from having an applicant pool of 300 interested candidates for our department to 80. And I'm sure 80 candidates for a position of 10 or 8 officers is nothing. You blow through that in a heartbeat. There's so many disqualifying factors.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can honestly say, like, when I got hired, I appreciated this job so much, and I appreciated the fact that I was even getting an interview. And the way things are today, some of these candidates just look at it as a job. And I almost feel like the way the media and some politicians view our profession, it's a job for them too, to look at it as a job. And I don't think the passion for the job is there any longer. I just feel like a lot of guys and gals could take it or leave it. And they're like, I'll take the test and I'll try it. And if I get hired, I get hired. If I don't, I don't. For me, to the day I retired, I appreciated this job and I love this job. With all the stuff going on and with the media and like you said, with the George Floyd and everything, I still had a passion for this job. And I feel like that's what's missing in this profession now.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of a lot of things, and I can definitely relate to the competitiveness, even just hearing from the generations prior to mine. I came in at a similar time, not to this extent, but where there was a narrower applicant pool. It was 2007, 2008, before the economy dipped, so everyone was hiring like crazy. A lot of the traditional candidates, from what I'd heard and what I'd seen in the news articles, was that traditional candidates were deployed overseas. We still had a lot of troops overseas, and the boomers were retiring in mass, right? So we had the biggest working generation all leaving the workforce all at the same time. And then it was already becoming a more unattractive profession back then. That's where I liken it to today, where I remember going on ride-alongs or going to interviews. And I mean, most departments I interacted with, there'd be someone that sarcastically like, hey man, you sure you don't want to be a firefighter? Because I don't know if you pay attention, cops, people don't like cops. So there's definitely a similarity there. I actually use that story to remind a lot of the younger guys I have or guys on my crew, say, hey man, like, I don't know what it was like for you when you came on, but I certainly wasn't trying to get all these accolades and parades every other week for just simply existing. Like, we came into this with some scrutiny, but our why and our purpose had to be so much louder and significant than that. And I think maybe that's what you're talking about, Chris, is feeling this lack of the level of commitment to this profession, and more than just a job or a vocation, right? It's a calling and it's a career, and certainly a lifestyle for those that have been in it. They can attest to that. It affects your whole life, your whole family.
Yeah, 100%. And I think the problem with the calling is when you're ambitious and you're excited to do something, you want people to push you to do that. And I think what's happening are people have the drive and the desire to go into this profession, but they see the lack of support by, I'm not even going to say the community, because in my opinion, the community has always, when I say community, I mean the negative part of the community, has always had a dislike for the police. It's just the nature of the job. I mean, you're seeing people at their worst. You're sending people to jail. You're not there to necessarily have a barbecue with people. You're there under extraordinary circumstances, and they're not always the best. The way some of these politicians and leaders are not supporting the police like they were back in the day, it's making people rethink their profession and their passion, because it's like, well, yeah, I really love doing this, and I really want to be a cop, and I really want to help people. But if I do something wrong, I'm going to go to jail for this, or I'm going to lose my job, or I'm going to lose my pension, or I'm going to lose my house. that's not very appealing anymore. It's sad.
Yeah, it's terrifying. I mean, I think they've had surveys, anonymous surveys and studies for years, and correct me if, or unless you've heard otherwise, but most cops are more afraid of being sued or the litigation than being shot at.
Yeah.
And I've had both, so I'll throw it out there. And
Yeah.
they're a different kind of stress. I won't belittle, the shooting. But it's certainly very stressful, and it carries and it weighs on you different ways. And now in this newer age of where getting criminally charged is a very real concern. Definitely out here, and I think it's most parts of the country, blue state, red states, yeah, it's everyone. So it's definitely something to be mindful of.
I mean, think about it. What profession has that fear hanging over your head? Not even a doctor has that type of a fear. It's scary. And I can't blame people for not wanting to do it. I really can't, but something's got to change. We got to make this profession noble again.
Yeah, and I think it's so complicated. I've thought about this so much before coming to this role, and then since taking on this role and paying attention to what we're doing, what appears to be working, what appears not to be working, and what all our neighbors and fellow recruiters, because there is some competition by nature because everyone has to look out for their own to some extent, but it is very much same team, right? So now that I've found some success, that's a lot of why I'm on here. That's a lot of why I put out my own social media, and I wrote an article on recruiting, submitted to Police One, where I just want to put out what worked, while I have my thoughts fresh and organized. But it is tough, right? You have many people in the industry that aren't doing the industry any favors. And I don't mean like bad cops. I just mean tired, frustrated cops. And I don't blame them for a bit. But at a certain point, when you have those people that are super dejected, they're super negative, maybe even borderline toxic, and you're trying to bring around recruits, and I'm not saying my department, I'm saying every department. I know it's in every single department. But these guys aren't doing themselves any favors. They're not doing their peers any favors that are trying to move forward in a positive direction. But it happened in, the recruiting game for me when I was very newly assigned. There was a young man that came into our department. He had linked up with me. We set up a time for a tour and just to talk about him and the career. And it turned out he'd actually grown up wanting to be a police officer. And he was in a local neighboring city in their Explorer program. I don't know if you have that out there.
Yeah, we have like a junior police academy type thing.
Yeah, exactly. So he was already doing all the things that, teenager would do to kind of prep for that. He had it on his mind after school. And then, he's basically 21, 22 now. So his young adulthood was experiencing the turmoil that's been the last couple of years. And he's an African-American man. So he was pulled away from his family and friends saying, hey, you got to pick a lane, and you can't be a black man and a cop. You got to choose. And so that was very impactful for me to hear. But he actually went back to his advisor because he tried to go a different direction. He was doing well at work, getting promoted, but there was still this nagging calling, right? This thing that he'd wanted for so long, and this purpose that he'd been driving toward. When he reached out to his advisor, the advisor really candidly and probably just from the hip said, hey man, like don't do it. Like, you don't want to come into this. And so his follow-up was initially kind of shock and confusion, but then he came to me, right? He'd never met me before, but he just went to the next city over, and then he was, a very promising applicant for us. So all to say, like, we have to make sure that we're not stuck in this victim mentality as police officers. And yes, the times might be unideal, they might be really strenuous, but at a certain point we choose to be here, and if we don't really feel committed to that, then we need to really firm out our gut check.
I can honestly say that everything that I've experienced within my career, and that's physical stress, mental stress, being involved in so many critical incidents, the impact that it's had on my family. Has it crossed my mind that, did I make the right decision becoming a police officer? Absolutely. I'd be lying if I said that never came across my mind. But I will say that I could never see myself doing anything else. I literally have the power every single day to affect someone's life for the good or for the bad. And I hold that power in very high regard. And I have so much passion with it. And going back to a feeling, we talked about it when you kind of first come in, almost like a sense of entitlement. When I was going through the academy, I just had one image in my head, and that was to get to my first roll call, my first briefing in my uniform, and to be able to sit there amongst my soon-to-be fellow brothers and sisters, wearing the patch that I earned, wearing the badge that I earned. And that's what got me through. And again, I don't see that as much nowadays. It's still there. I still see it with some of our people that come in, but I don't see it as much. And a lot of that, I think, has to do with our culture. We are so beat down as a police culture that it's hard for us to put a smile on, and it's hard to us to explain our passion. I think most of us still have it. It's just been so pushed down and suppressed that it's just not getting out, and that's affecting. You talk to me on the street, and I'll tell you, like, still to this day, all the stuff that I dealt with, I still think that people should become police officers and get that level of fulfillment.
I mean, I can tell you, being a police officer, like I said, close to 30 years, and then having my son follow in my footsteps. I mean, he'll tell you how passionate I was about this job. And I'm still passionate about it. If I wasn't passionate about it, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing right now. And the fact of the matter is, I never once pushed him into this profession. I never said, you're going to follow my footsteps, you're going to be a cop, you're going to be whatever. I allowed him to make that decision. And I know inside my heart, from being a police officer, I know what type of person my son is, and I know what he can bring to the table in this profession. And yes, as a parent, absolutely 100% proud that my son chose to be a police officer. Does it make me nervous? Yeah, absolutely. It makes me more nervous as a parent. And now that I'm not on the street, we're working in the same agency where I see him every day, I have obvious concerns, but I mean, I got to tell you again, as a father and as a fellow police officer, I couldn't see my son doing anything else. And I see the fulfillment in his life. I see how much he loves what he does, which makes me proud. And I can tell you, I see it in his eyes when, him and I talk pretty much every day, and, he's passionate about the jobs he's been on, or, a critical incident that was a success, and it's contagious. And if more officers can do that, I think we can get out of this hole, but like you said, there's so many negative aspects about this profession now. And we've all said this a million times, that the most stress that you get is from the administration. And trust me, I know. I was the administration. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I was on both sides of the fence, and I understand both sides of it. And now you put more stress from the outside world, social media, politics, everything. And it does make it very, very hard. But when you have your own people, like you said, why do you want to get into this? Hey kid, don't make car stops at 2:00 in the morning, or just do the absolute minimum, or don't do this. It's not helping the cause. And bringing people in to this profession that are enthusiastic about it, that really want to do it, I really think they can get us out of this hole. I really do. It's just going to take some time. Like anything else in law enforcement, we go through cycles and we go through ups and downs. And I personally think we're on our way back up. I think we hit rock bottom, and I think we're on our way back up. So I think the profession's going to get exciting again.
Yeah, I appreciate what you gentlemen have shared, because yes, admin, politics, social media, the media at large, I'm not at all saying that we couldn't have some help and some encouragement from those large scale entities that definitely causes so much stress and scrutiny. It would certainly help our whole situation, our relationship in communities, the hiring thing, but also just effectively solving crime, right? And when closing cases, if people trust their local cops, if there's police legitimacy and that a strong bond. However, for me, we can't sit around and wait for that, right? And that's what I hear from both of you is, you had all these stressful situations, all these ups and downs, but by far the ups outweigh all the downs. And that's why you're both committed to this profession, Chris, even with you being retired. And for me, that's what's really refreshing, is talking to some recent retirees where they see how I'm trying to engage, and I'm getting a lot of kudos from what some people may have pegged the old guard. And the reason why is because some of the other retired peers they're kind of poo-pooing that police in general are functioning differently, or they're communicating differently, and they're pandering, they're caving, all this and that. It's like, I mean, what the job always was, as I perceived it, was problem solving and taking care of people, right? So you boil it down to those basic things. The flavor and the style could change all the time, right? But if you're effectively solving a problem, you can't just keep doing it the same way. Even if it's how we talk to people, or how we engage on calls, and how we do our training, how we interface, all these things.
I don't think the mission's changed. I think that the circumstances have changed around the mission. And, like you said, the old guard, there's just some people that aren't willing to change with it. And they're willing to throw their hands up and be like, I'm not bothering with this anymore. But if you're committed to it and you're passionate about it, you're going to fight through those struggles and you're going to come out on top. Going back to the retirees and the old heads and everything. Yeah, I could sit here and be this crusty old guy saying, son, don't get in this profession, go be a fireman or something else. I'm not. Like, I would strap a uniform on tomorrow and go back out on the street. That's how much I love this profession. Even a lot of these guys that are older that aren't willing to change with the times, like you were saying, they tell these young kids don't even bother, and they're still I don't know what you call them in your area, but we call them RODs, retired on duty. And they're basically just the guys that anything a guy or girl does out on the street, they're doing too much. Just answer your calls, don't do anything, because if you do something, you're going to get in trouble. And they're putting fear in these young cops' minds. And I can't stand that. That drives me crazy. I hated it when I was on the street. I hated hearing it when I was a lieutenant. A quick war story. I was a lieutenant. I had a brand new sergeant, and I'm talking to my platoon, and it was a midnight shift. The sergeant comes in, and the first thing the sergeant says is, I don't want any car stops after 2:00. I'm tired, and I don't feel like dealing with it. Well, I released the platoon. I told them to go out on the street, and I proceeded to have a conversation with my sergeant. I'm like, how do you expect to encourage these people to go out there and do their jobs if you're going to sit here and tell them not to do their jobs? Like, now, this is coming from a guy who already had 22 years on the street. Okay. I could have very easily been like, yeah, whatever Sarge said, just be quiet. We don't want any trouble tonight. No, I want you to go out, find crime and arrest people or help people or whatever the case may be. And if you have that type of encouragement, your chest is going to blow up. You're going to pound your chest and go, yeah, I got the backing of my supervisor. He wants me to go out and do a good job. You're not getting that with some of these people anymore. And it's sad.
Yeah, there's such a focus on the negativity, and there's new laws or new policies or the fear of litigation or case law, and it shifts so many people into this, oh man, we can't do this, we can't do that, we can't chase cars, we can't arrest for this or book for that. But I think what's been impactful for me, and I'm not going to take all the credit, but I've been able to be among other leaders at my level and above that quickly focused it into, okay, what can we do? Like, let's drop the can't, let's talk about what can we do. So let's map it out. Let's talk about it in briefing or roll call, and let's go over the new laws. Let's go over the new guidelines from the prosecutor's office, and let's do some scenarios. Like, everyone bring a situation or a call that you had last week, and maybe there was a bit of a hiccup and some differing opinions on how we could best handle that, whether it was a mental health issue or a criminal issue. But let's actually roundtable this and talk through what can we do, what case law can we cite, and how do we interpret this with best practice, so we're all on the same page and we can all focus on action rather than inaction. And that's been super helpful for me when you make it about something other than yourself and get in your own head. And I think that's where the mentorship piece is huge. And for those that have been in for a little while, if you shift the attention towards those new guys, right, they're ready to go, but they don't have the experience or the wherewithal to do it confidently, and they're looking to seasoned officers that have been on for some time. And that seasoned officer, I mean, it's definitely happening here where that seasoned officer is having fewer and fewer years on, and there's fewer of them. So really, it underlines their significance and how impactful they're going to be or need to be.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with that. We have also seen a lot of success with that kind of style of leadership as far as debriefing jobs, and to almost to the point where I've had guys from other units and other platoons, on the side come up to me and say, hey, we really want to debrief this job. They want to learn with the guys that are in there. And I think part of our problem is not knowing what we can and can't do, especially like our newer generations, because to your point, you have these senior officers who only have 3 to 5 years on, and they're giving their experiences and they're giving their level of education, which just isn't there. Case in point, we had an officer who was an FTO, field training officer, and he had 4 years on. He was training a brand new officer, and he is just giving wrong information out to this new recruit, and it just was blowing my mind. So it is our fault as leaders and more senior officers that we're not pushing this down and we're not allowing these guys to grow. One of the things that we implemented in my unit, one of my previous units, was we gave each guy every month, once a month, we would give an officer a piece of case law. It's just something small, maybe like a strip search or something to do with motor vehicle searches, something along those lines, pretty broad. If they had a particular case or investigation that they had called a sergeant about and they weren't 100% certain with how it went or whatever, that was one of their topics. And we found that the guys would put we told them, I'm like, listen, I'll give you time while you're during your shift. I'll bring you in the headquarters. You can put together a little PowerPoint. You can do some research. And I found that the guys were spending 4 or 5 hours at home off duty researching it. And then they're coming in and they're getting in front of their peers and they're passionately speaking about it because they want to learn. They have the experience, so they have the visualization of what occurred, and now they want to clarify it and they want to tell others. So it's definitely effective letting these guys express themselves and show what they've learned and teach others to empower them with their knowledge.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, you really make it about the officer level, and even the newest recruit or newest officer can have skin in the game because they need to become the expert on this, and it helps them through learning. It helps them through teaching, and now everyone's elevated from that. So that's a great practice, and we definitely have that going on. We talk about the youth in departments going on. We see it here, us and all our neighboring agencies. But yeah, your field training officers are like a couple years on, and SWAT, K9, these really competitive things that used to you need like 5 or 10 years, 5 on the short end to get in or be competitive.
Yeah. Yep.
Now it's like 3 or 4 years. Maybe you get a waiver. You can test before 3 years. Detectives, it might be anywhere from 3 to 5 years, depending on the unit. And I mean, these are stellar candidates that are going in with that little amount of time, but it's just a totally different game where we're looking at some patrol crews where the senior officer might only have a couple years on. And so it is a little bit of the blind leading the blind, because it's not to say they're not sharp, but it's literally less time and just a fraction of the types of calls or incidents that you go through over numerous more years, right?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, I don't care how book smart you are, you need to have the experience under your belt before you can. Like, I know for me, I didn't feel comfortable in this job until I had about 5 years on. When I had 5 years on, I felt like I could go out to a job, I could handle the job. I didn't have to be calling my sergeant every 5 minutes being like, I got this, I got that, what do I do? I made the decisions. I called the sergeant and said, this is what I got, this is what I'm doing. And more times than not, I was correct. And even though I was book smart, like, I'm a case law guy. Like, I love case law. I've always loved case law. And like what Matt was saying about giving guys, or you said it, skin in the game. We have these officers that only have 2, 3, 4 years on. It's up to the supervisors to give them that opportunity to learn, to give them the case law and say, hey, this is what you had last night. Look up some case law and tell me what you should have done. Too many times, a lot of guys will read the first or second paragraph of a case law and they think, well, I can do that or I can't do that. And you were saying it earlier. Let's sit down and let's really look at it and see what we're missing. You're getting all upset because you can't do A and B. Well, maybe C and D is there. We're like, oh, we never even realized that. Having these younger officers in the profession without the experience and not being given the opportunity to learn while they're doing it. Because I mean, let's face it, there's a lot of supervisors, there's a lot of agencies out there. It's like, just go out and answer your calls. If you got a question, call me. And that we're not teaching them anything and they're not learning anything and they're not becoming passionate about their profession because they have no purpose. They're just like a machine. So to give them the opportunity to grow and learn, I think is so important. And like you said, you got a guy who's got 3 years on or 4 years on being a field training officer. Like, really? Like that's young for a field training officer.
Yeah. And it might just be where we're at. I mean, we're encountering that where they're sharp, they're squared away, but because everyone is so young, you gotta work with what you got. And so
Exactly.
I've been chewing on this a lot. And how do you get around that? Because everyone's talking about it. You're gonna have young officers, you're going to have a ton of them. You're going to have young field training officers. You're going to have young sergeants and young commanders and on, right? So it might be overly simple, but I think that the best hack is just really leaning into mentorship, right? Maybe even to take a spin off of Jocko's like extreme ownership is like extreme mentorship. Like if every link of the chain is very invested and hands-on with their protege or with their subordinate, then it's not that, hey, call me if you need me, right? Like, and that can be mistaken for just being an easygoing leader and he really trusts me and lets me do my thing. It's like, yeah, but what do you risk by that? By not being involved, by not being engaged? Absolutely. And I think you risk a lot, right? Bridging that communication, making it a regular thing, touch base, really see it through and maybe even take on that field training mentality to every rank, right? And hopefully agencies are doing that so it's not just winging it and shooting from the hip.
So Eric, one question I had for you, it's kind of like I don't want to say a running joke, but everything that happens out on the West Coast finds its way over to New Jersey. We're a couple years behind you guys, but anything that happens out in California, Oregon, Washington, sooner or later it finds its way right out to New York and New Jersey. So one of the questions that I had is, what are you guys doing as far as recruitment and going out into the community and trying to get new applicants? Now, I do want to say that I was stalking your department website and I found a recruitment video, which was pretty awesome. I got to tell you, whoever you guys used for that production company did a fantastic job, and all your cops were stellar.
Yeah, well, thank you. So a couple things. First, I thought you were going a different direction. Like all the stuff starts on the West Coast, like BS policies or case law or something like that.
Well, that too, but I'm
yeah. All right. So first off with the video, that was actually our city multimedia, stellar talent, Alex, but he actually left the state. And so maybe he'll freelance. I'll connect you guys after the podcast.
Yeah, please do.
But yeah, that was actually a pre-COVID video in the works, and that's how much work went into it from the team. So when the irony is, that's part of our website and people testing, and they go to the test site, which is out here, largely a private company that does almost all the city testing or municipal and county testing for police and fire. But they play that video in the background as people are coming in and they're looking at that, and they can add on to test with us, and we cover the fee, that kind of thing that a lot of departments do out here just for get exactly that, recruiting. But this video is playing in the background, and then I meet these candidates and they're like, oh, I saw you in the video. But the ironic part is I had nothing to do with recruiting when that was filmed. It was pre-COVID, and one of my buddy was clowning on me because when it finally came out, he's like, "Man, what happened to you? You look great in that video." But and I
I'm
was like, "It's
inside
COVID,
now.
bro.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's COVID."
it's hitting us all
So
real hard.
yeah. So no, it's cool, and Chief had the vision for that, and just to have this really, really polished, but also uh, engaged video, and they did a lot of video series with that, which is really cool. But definitely a good recruiting tool. Um, the main thing that I came into, to be honest, was just recognizing the stigmas and the impressions, and you had, regional impressions of like what wasn't going to work, and you had even national narratives to what doesn't work for recruiting and hiring, and how it's all digital, and traditional job fairs don't work, this and that doesn't work. But really, when I came in with my guy Brian, I was like, hey, we cannot afford to take any of that just as doctrine. We just need to throw everything against the wall. Like whatever we got, if you got an idea, I'm good with, let's roll, let's just do it. And so that's not a me thing, that's a team thing, and definitely having the support of my commander and really pushing us to be creative. And that's where we were able to build our social media presence a little bit. Instagram, that's where we were reaching a lot of people, but we were also getting on Indeed and LinkedIn and just trying to just cold shot people with very mixed results. But really, I think the biggest takeaway was just to try things and get out there. And so any event we had in the city or in the region, if it was job related, if it wasn't job related, if it was just a cultural event, or if it was just a fun time, like we had the state fair going on in the springtime, like a smaller version of it. So we just got out there and we just put cops out there, and it definitely helped to have a budget, or I guess a loose budget, because administration was like, hey, just get guys out there because we need to try everything. And really paying people to overtime is like chump change compared to paying some of these companies that are coming out of the woodwork. And I don't know if you've experienced that or that angle as far as if you have any involvement with your department's recruiting, but there's a lot of a lot of businesses that come out in this hiring crisis and pitching their services. But my own personal take was that it wasn't going to get people to sign on to be a cop or find these great candidates by a radio ad or digital marketing, but really just being able to talk to someone. And so, to summarize a lot of it, my approach was to make community outreach exactly the same mission as recruiting, and vice versa. So we actually tagged that together, and I asked my boss, I was like, hey, can I put community outreach on my cards? Because that's literally what I want to do. He's like, yeah, go for it, man. Like, you never have enough of that. So we would just go everywhere. We'd go to schools, we'd go to events, and softly we were just like, hey, we don't need to get a lead to succeed, because we're having conversations, we're bridging the gap, we're letting people ask whatever questions they always want to ask a cop, or just interface, right? But even in hindsight, if we had one solid lead, one good prospect, like the event was well worth it. The couple hours you're there, you're just on your feet or talking to people, it was well worth it in hindsight.
I've had personal success with conversation piece when I go to certain events, like our local high schools or whatever, and you have that one-on-one interaction. That's where we always get the results, I would say, and we're able to get them into the process. And again, it's a little bit prolonged for us because you have to go through the state civil service and you have to do a test and everything like that. But we have to get people to sign up for that, and going to these events is what gets us to do that. And when we first started this conversation, I was saying that we had 800 candidates or people signing up for that. We've gotten to the point now where we've made recruiting teams part of like auxiliary units, and they're going to high schools, they're going to colleges, and they're going to job fairs and going out there and explaining the profession. Some do a great job, some of them have that passion behind it, and that's what's drawing them in. But the recruitment video and going out there and talking the one-on-one, I think it appeals more to our generation. I'm in my mid-30s, and obviously I'm becoming older and older in the profession.
Yeah,
So I
we're
don't.
dinosaurs now. I'm
Yeah.
37, so we're ancient.
Man, you guys.
So I don't have the same, appeal to the younger generation as I once did when I first got into it. But they grew up watching screens, and I think that the social media avenue of it and the video avenue of it is really it's something to get them drawn in.
For sure. Yeah. And so that was like our leaning in towards Instagram. We would love to do TikTok and things like that, but with privacy and public disclosure in the city, just being mindful of that. It wasn't like we could just get on every platform, but for agencies that their city policies or administrations are open to that, I mean, that's certainly an idea, right? I mean, why not get on platforms like that, and then to get on a podcast, right? And so however people are absorbing media now, I think that it was very impactful to be able to meet and greet with people, for sure, like to meet the human, but then we'd always divert them back to our Instagram, our future cops, or vice versa. We'd post on, hey, we're going to be at this event, and sometimes we actually would have some followers that were looking to test, because that's why they learned about us and they start following, and then they see on our story, hey, you're going to be down at the shopping plaza. I'm there. Like that's my time to go, or kind of BS with a recruiter for 20-30 minutes, and then just giving everyone the time of day. So you touched on it, but as far as recruiters, some really selling the message and the impact of the job, but then others not doing as great a job. Who you have in that position is critical. And that's where I really appreciate my team. Again, my recruiter is like extrovert to the max, and he's a good storyteller, and he's got his heart on his sleeve, and we're both peer support, but he's just very much like, no, there's no hiding his emotions, and he can really connect with people and draw in a room. Whereas for me, it's something that I've practiced and I've gotten better, but it's my natural leaning is for sure an introvert. But just to have the people that are committed and comfortable, and that's where I think I was successful in that. Although my leaning is not to just talk in front of a ton of people, I'm very comfortable talking about the real stuff and talking about the trauma, and then also what you can do in this role, right? Like we're both peer support, and Chris was in resiliency, so I mean that's critical, like to the longevity and your healthy life, your healthy career. I think people really do appreciate that it's not just the storybook or the bright, cool video, but afterwards you're like, hey, like this is some real stuff, and it's some heavy stuff that you're going to see. It's really impactful. You can literally be in the right position to save someone's life, and the times you're not, it's really hard on you. But if you're surrounded by the right people, the right culture, the right practices, and a lot of that you can affect on your own, then it can be something that you can navigate really healthfully.
Yeah, I 100% agree. That's kind of like where we went with this whole podcast thing. We wanted to do like a stripped down version, no frills, of what it is like to be a police officer from the day you get hired to the day you retire. And that was our whole focus. And it's just having candid conversations. Like, I don't know if you had the opportunity to listen to all our stuff, but we do a segment with my daughter. And my daughter's husband's also a police officer. And she just recently got married a year ago, and they just had a baby. And he's been on a job 5 or 6 years. And, he's getting out of that honeymoon stage. So he's going through a lot of emotional stuff in the profession. But we talk about that. And like you said, you're going to have your ups and downs. You're going to have your times where you have the opportunity to save somebody's life, but you're also going to have the unfortunate opportunity of not saving somebody's life. So to be able to lay it all out to people, it's nice if you could sit there and say, hey, join the police department. It's the greatest thing in the world. You're not going to have any stress. You're going to have bells and whistles and new police cars and uniforms and all that stuff. It's just not true. But you're going to have that to an extent, because in my opinion, the reward by far outweighs the negativity of the profession. And again, with what we wanted to do is we just wanted to show everybody, okay, this is what you're going to go through in the hiring process. This is what you're going to go through in the academy. This is what's going to happen when you start working midnights and get moody and all. And then this is what's going to happen when something great happens, where you saved a life. and how that makes you feel. And that's the part that always kept me going. I could have had 10 bad days, but if I save somebody's life, or listen, we've all done it 100 times. If I went into the store and bought somebody a soda or a cup of coffee or a hamburger, or somebody was down and out or whatever, that made me feel good. Not because I wanted to get on social media and say, hey, look what Officer so-and-so did for this person. I did it because it made me feel good, and I was helping somebody. And I think that, to me, is the draw, that most people that want to be police officers, that's what they're looking for. Am I making sense? I mean,
Yeah, absolutely. And the phrase that pops up to me is humanizing the badge. And I feel like I see some circles where that gets a bad rap, and there's probably haters that the fact that we're even talking about any of this and spending time, like, who the heck cares, right? And there's videos that are absolutely abhorrent, and I'm like, oh, stop it right now, right? That's not helping. But then there's videos that are really funny, and they really show someone's their personality, their humor. You're like, okay, cool. Like, that's what people need, is they need to see that cops are people, and the majority of cops, like the vast majority of cops, are people that really give a crap about other people. That's why they're doing it. And I think that's biggest testament to that, and how you were a cop, how you carried yourself as a cop, and navigated your career, Chris, is that your son followed in your footsteps. I think there's no greater compliment than your kids wanting to be just like you. That you did something right there, right? But then you have people like me that, I a little later in my adolescence, I suppose, in college is when I really started thinking about public service and really not knowing where to start and how to go about it. I didn't grow up around any of it. And so I had to figure out a lot trial by fire. But if we do a good job as an industry of creating those opportunities through, these events and just being out in the community, and even where a lot of the generation is on their screens, where they can connect with officers and they can see us as people, and they can even send us a message and ask for advice. I mean, that's a lot of why I think all three of us even doing this, is to be approachable, to be transparent, and then help people have the tools to succeed in considering themselves as a police officer or first responder, and going from there.
I appreciate the kind words about Matt, but even like for me, I was a first generation officer. I didn't have anybody, but I had friends that were police officers, and they took me under their wing. And just like you said, you might not have anybody right now to mentor from a family standpoint, but the people that you are mentoring, the future police officers, they're going to remember that for the rest of their life, and they're going to remember you, and they're going to remember another officer that took care of them and took them under the wing and told them, you could do this job, you can be great at it, and they will be great at it. And with people like you and us and a whole host of other guys and gals out there that are positive about this profession, we're the ones that are going to make this rise up again.
Yeah, I think that's key though, is, you're bridging that, you're putting the lines out there, you're opening up so people can find you, they can reach you, you're accessible, whether it's as a department representative, as a recruiter, or just to be an outward facing officer. When you're out on the street, are you actually making eye contact and smiling, or do you have RBF and you're mean mugging without even meaning to? And that's something that I had to I had to check myself on that, years ago, just because I just found that's what my face would do, especially when I'm out on patrol. I'm you're looking around, you're trying to be vigilant, and then your face can do certain things that you may or may not be intending to. But yeah, even recruiters, like I've noticed at career fairs where, me and my counterpart were, they give you a table and they give you chairs, but you'd have to order us back behind our table, and we'd go out and mingle and just try to, tap people on the shoulder and just go to them. And that's kind of the energy we try to bring. And that's the energy that you're going to need to do, right? Gone are the days where a department can just sit back and say, well, come to us, we'll receive your application and we'll go from there. We'll send you some oral board dates, and then we'll meet you there and prove yourself. So we found that going out, rather than, some recruiters we'd see literally sit in their chair the whole time, and it was very much this come to me persona. But we've even we just really wanted to give everyone the tools and remove the mystique. So part of our hiring process or recruiting strategy was to engage them with skills and develop them as candidates. So we would host twice monthly sessions, candidate workshops, where for sure we have a lot of opportunity to tell a couple quick stories and explain our why and really tell them about our culture and our department. But more than that, a lot of it was actually, PowerPoint class on how do you put your best foot forward? How do you present well? Let's talk about interviewing, the type of questions that you may see at our department or other departments, and what we're looking for in an oral board, what makes someone successfully pass the background, which is, telling them
Yeah,
20 some ways how not to lie. And yes, omission is a lie. And yes, minimizing is a lie. Just tell it as it is and we'll sift through it. But some people don't like that. They think that, again, that's pandering to the new generation, the soft generation, or, you're going to get worse candidates. But what I've truly found, what I believed and I've confirmed is that by doing these sessions, your strong candidates only show up better, and your weak candidates aren't going to pass the background process anyway. You can give them the rule book, but they're not gonna figure it out, or they're not going to take the time or the commitment, or you just by proxy of the background process and polygraph and all that stuff, they're just going to utterly fail anyway.
I'll tell you something that we did, or I should say I did when I was in charge of training. I was in charge of the FTO program as well. And I was a field training officer forever. I mean, again, I think I had 4 or 5 years on when I got it, and I kind of took over the program, and then getting it in the training unit, obviously it just went with the job. But one of the things that we did was, after the guy or girl got hired and passed all the exams and everything, we immediately assigned a field training officer to them. What that field training officer did was, that was their point of contact throughout their entire experience in the academy. They weren't training them, and they weren't really doing anything with them other than being like peer support. So, you take a young kid who just graduated from college, they never really had a real job. They never really got yelled at or told what to do or anything. So they're coming into a new environment that they don't understand. And they're getting shout down. They got to do push-ups, pull-ups, reports, all this stuff. You got to be back in at 6 a.m. You're not getting out of there till 7 p.m. And the stress is just overwhelming. So we assigned an FTO to him, and his responsibility or her responsibility was, if they're feeling down or they need some help, they could call you and just talk to you. If they're saying they want to quit, you're not reporting that to us. You're just being like a friend to them and helping them through the process. And I got to tell you, it was pretty successful. I mean, we've lost people in the past in the academy. I don't know what the percentage is, but when we started implementing that, and the recruit knew that they had somebody in the department they could talk to without ridicule or anything like that, it seemed pretty successful. And even after they got out of the academy, they already had somewhat of a relationship with their field training officer. So they felt a little more comfortable going out on the street. Because you know how uncomfortable it is when you graduate from the police academy, you go out on the street, and now your field training officer is telling you what to do. It is so awkward and so uncomfortable, because you're not even going to be able to spell your name right on the report. You're so nervous. So that kind of broke the ice a little bit too. So they already knew him, and it seemed to be pretty successful for us.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love that, because we have a version of that where before they go to academy, they are introduced to training staff. So a training sergeant, which will be me soon, and then a training officer. But then, yeah, I'd like to bring back, we had a formalized mentorship program, but then that's one of my goals, is to bring that back, so as to spread a little bit of the contact and let new recruits meet officers. Because I think, again, it's like, we need to recognize that when we're short staffed, when we're understaffed, and we're running around like, our tails are on fire, and so to pass judgment or to size them up, kind of like the old school culture that we came into, like we need to be past that. We can't be proud of how many people we're asking again, like, hey, come to us to apply, and hey, prove yourself through our field, maybe a field evaluation program rather than field training program. And it's like all of a sudden, once they're solo status and they're off probation, now they're in this, the special brotherhood. It's almost like hazing, right? So but yeah, like if we go through all the work, all the scrutiny and the steps to find these very rare, very coveted, fantastic candidates that are of high integrity, high quality, and now we're gonna wash them, just because they're not writing fast enough, or picking up on frisk factors. Like, no, like let's train them, right? Like, and for sure, if someone's not cutting it after a period of time, I get it, right? Like this job isn't for everyone, and our testing process, at least for us, it's not like mock scenes and things like that. So yeah, it's not going to be for everyone, but I do think that for the majority of the time, like just about everything is trainable outside of character, which is what we're hopefully doing a good job evaluating in the hiring process.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a good field training officer, you're going to pick up on that. You're going to know who's cut out for this job and who's not. And if you are truly a real instructor or teacher, you're going to take the time with these people and you're going to make them succeed. But like you said, there's just some people out there that it's just not for them. You'll know when that time comes.
The concept of improving the candidate, or having like a candidate coaching class or whatever, that I never thought of that. That sounds like a really interesting concept. To you have this pool of people, and I'm right now, my wheels are turning as how we can implement it, with the guidelines that we have with civil service and all that stuff. But I absolutely love that concept. Not only am I bringing you up to speed of what to expect from the law enforcement side, I'm also bringing you up to speed as far as what is expected of you as a man or a woman, and the type of character or person that I want. And we in law enforcement are so heavy on training and everything to not even think about that before we put them through the process, to develop these candidates a little bit more before we invest so much time and energy into them just to go through the process to be washed out. It's so the dots are all connecting in my mind right now, and I find it to be very beneficial.
Oh yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I think it is still maybe not widely accepted, because some people, it's a lot of the, hey, I didn't have any help and I got here. And it's like, well, that's fantastic, right? But we need more like you. And if we can school someone up and give them the answer key, or not the answer key so much as the study guide. For me, like I said, when I was testing, I did everything wrong. I utterly failed my first oral board with a small town that I grew up in. And then through trial and error is when I figured out, oh, okay, I answer the question like this. My scores seem to get a little better. I guess I'll try more of that. And then finally, I was testing for a small town that I actually had no interest to work at. But I'd already sent my scores there and paid for it, and then had an oral board coming up. And luckily I was mature enough to recognize, hey, you don't have a job, man. Let's go figure out this interview thing. But because I went in with such low pressure and I wasn't sweating it, I was myself. I was a lot more candid. I was speaking way more conversationally and naturally. And I even made fun of myself a little bit, and the board loved it. Like, you could see they relaxed and they were just looking at a person that, hopefully they liked, right? That they said, yeah, I'd like to work with this guy or this kid. I aced it. So it was a huge lesson for me. Okay, more of that, less of what I was trying to be was, really stoic and rigid. And again, not knowing any police officers, just assuming, what I deserved from a distance. Yeah. So completely wrong. Terrible interviewer at the first stage. So, but if we can just tell people, hey, we want you to be yourselves. We want to hear about the things that make you you, and think about your big significant life events that may be applicable in any kind of question. Like, we won't give you the questions, but think about that, and think about who you are. Think about what you bring to the table. Think about beyond, I want to help people. It's like, cool. There's, teachers help people, nurses help people. They're fantastic, right? Private sector people help people, but why police? Why do you want this job? There has to be something specific, and that's where people can really understand what we're looking for. And then again, I think we all know someone that would be a fantastic cop, and maybe they've been trying for a while, but they just can't crack that first process. But you know their character, you know why they want it, but they can't interview well. Well, why not tell them a couple skills so that they can interview well and they can get the job? So that's really where we were at, with just trying to create that opportunity. And again, it's this trying to have a more growth mindset and abundance mindset, because I came into this role thinking exactly everything I heard, which is that there's no one that wants to be a cop, and the ones that do, there's not nearly enough of them. And we'll see, right? There's definitely room for improvement. But what I found is that if you're out there and you realize that, hey, if I put on this class or I take a little extra time, I'm going to find some good people, and they might get hired here or they might get hired at the city next door. But either way, that's a win-win for the community. We obviously mutual aid all the time, so we're all the same team, but then also it's just the community at large doesn't just stop at our city borders. So just trying to pay it forward and just get out there. And really it just goes back to my theme that I think was so successful, is just trying it and just engaging.
It's an awesome way of looking at it. And that right there is a testament to the character of most police officers. As long as I'm in it to help the team and to improve my community or the state that I live, that's all I ever wanted to do. It just wraps it all up.
Yeah. And I think that with that, it's you've kept this really strong compass of your purpose, right? We talked about critical incidents, we talked about the stress, but sure. And I appreciate the sharing that you thought about, what if not this job, and should I stay, should I go? I had the same thoughts, and that's a lot of why I created, my Blue Grit Wellness, like Instagram, and just as an outlet. I just wanted to be positive, and I wanted to put out positive wellness stuff to other cops and non-cops. And after George Floyd, a lot of the people that knew me from school were like, "Hey man, you're still a cop, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And a couple times I got the, "Hey, I wish there were more cops like you, because you're just a nice dude," and that just fell into this. And that, it was such a bittersweet moment, but mostly frustrating, because my immediate reaction was like, I'm just one of so many. Like, you just don't know. And just because I didn't grow up knowing any cops, and clearly these people didn't grow up knowing any either, so I'm their only link in to this huge profession. Is like, man, if you only knew, like, I'm sure I appreciate the nice guy comment, but there are some people that put their heart and soul in way more hours. They take on way more stress than I do at times. They just really care. And that's what keeps our society functioning, to some degree, for sure. So, just wanting to get out there and be a little bit more transparent and open. That's a lot of why, I started a lot of these projects, and even putting my name in the hat for hiring. I had just gone to a small unit, which is more community focused, and, kind of these chronic problems after almost my whole career, 14 years in patrol on the street. So I finally got into my like small unit, this thing that I'd been really going for the majority of my career. And then hiring comes up, where I was definitely not ready for a desk. That was my concern. But as I saw it, there was really no way that I could impact our department and our culture, and just bridging and finding the actual help through more officers than this role. So it's been really meaningful. But I think that the biggest appreciation I have, and for those that have worked alongside me or helped directly with recruiting, is that you can easily find reminders of your why, even if you lose sight of it for a little bit, right? So to talk to a bright-eyed young man or woman that wants to put themselves out there and wants to serve in this very righteous path is very inspiring. And if it's not, then you really need to do another gut check, right?
Yeah.
And if it's not motivating for you to turn it up a little bit for yourself and find that momentum for yourself to show them the way, or to help them in some regard, then maybe you really have lost that spark in your commitment to this, because it's not something that you should be able to just clock in, clock out, right? it's something where to be a solid police officer, you really need to be invested. And so for me, although I have had those ups and downs, I think making it about other people as I have more years in this has definitely kept my fire burning. Being a patrol sergeant and then making it about your guys, and peer support, making it about your team, and now mentoring the soon to be or maybe hopeful police officers. Like, for sure, that's been very, very reinvigorating for me.
We are super appreciative that you reached out to us and that we were able to have this conversation and connect with us. It definitely reignites a fire for us, and it refreshes us that there's guys like you all over this country, and you share the same passion that we share. That is how I know that this profession is going to be fine. And not only is it going to be fine, it's going to be better than it ever was because of guys and girls like you. So we truly do appreciate it, and we appreciate all the beneficial information that you've sent our way. And I'm going to be applying some of it for sure. The old saying, West Coast comes to East Coast, and this was no exception.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. That's a very strong compliment. And I appreciate being able to meet you gentlemen and connect on these things. Like, we're all in the same boat. Although it is, it's a very large boat spanning the whole nation. But yeah, we're all facing the same issues, same challenges. And so I think by connecting, we can definitely find the same opportunities. And so, no, it's been my pleasure for sure. And be definitely down to have another conversation in the future.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much, Matt and Chris.
Absolutely. Thank you.